The dust kicked up from the ranch road settled slowly in the evening air as Sarah Martinez stepped out of her father's old pickup truck. She had driven 3 hours from Austin to reach the Double Creek Ranch, her hands trembling on the steering wheel for the last 20 miles. At 24, she had never been this far from the city, never been alone on a working ranch, and certainly never met anyone like the man she was supposed to interview for her magazine article. Jake Morrison stood leaning against the wooden fence post, his weathered hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee despite the Texas heat. His dark hair showed traces of premature gray at the temples, and his blue eyes seemed to take in everything at once: the approaching storm clouds, the restless cattle, and, now her. Sarah felt those eyes studying her as she gathered her courage and her notebook, stepping carefully around the mud puddles in her completely inappropriate city shoes. "You must be the writer from that fancy magazine," Jake said, his voice carrying the slow drawl that seemed to make every word deliberate. "Figured you'd be older." Sarah's cheeks burned with embarrassment and something else she couldn't quite name. She had expected condescension from the cowboy she was meant to profile, but not this quiet assessment that made her feel transparent. "I'm Sarah Martinez from Texas Monthly. Thank you for agreeing to the interview, Mr. Morrison." "Jake," he corrected, pushing himself away from the fence with an easy grace. "And I only agreed because my sister threatened to stop bringing me her apple pie if I didn't." The hint of a smile played at the corners of his mouth, but his eyes remained serious. "You sure you want to do this story? Ranch life isn't exactly glamorous." Something in his tone suggested he had dealt with disappointed journalists before, writers who came looking for romantic cowboy fantasies and left when they discovered the reality of early mornings, hard work, and endless responsibility. Sarah straightened her shoulders, determined not to be dismissed so easily. "I'm here to tell your story, not create a fantasy," she said, meeting his gaze directly. "The real story." Jake studied her for a long moment, then nodded toward the main house. "Coffee's on. We can talk inside where it's cooler." The ranch house surprised Sarah with its warmth and cleanliness. She had expected something rough and masculine, but someone had clearly taken care to make this a home. Handmade quilts draped the furniture, fresh flowers sat on the kitchen table, and photographs lined the mantelpiece. Family pictures, ranch hands at work, horses and cattle in various seasons. "My mother's touch," Jake explained, noticing her interest in the photos. "She passed 5 years ago, but I couldn't bring myself to change much." Sarah felt something shift in the room, a vulnerability in Jake's admission that made her approach softer. She pulled out her notebook and pen, settling into the chair he offered at the kitchen table. "Tell me about the ranch. How long has it been in your family?" "For generations," Jake said, pouring her coffee without asking if she wanted any. "My great-grandfather bought this land in 1924 with money he saved working the oil fields. Back then, it was just scrub brush and hope. Now we run about 1,500 head of cattle on 8,000 acres." As Jake talked, Sarah found herself drawn not just to his words but to the way he moved around the kitchen with unconscious familiarity, the way his hands gestured when he spoke about the land, the way his voice grew softer when he mentioned his family. She had interviewed dozens of people for stories, but something about Jake Morrison demanded a different kind of attention. "You're not what I expected," she said suddenly, then immediately regretted the admission. Jake raised an eyebrow, settling into the chair across from her. "What did you expect?" Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks again. "I don't know. Someone more rough around the edges, I suppose. Less articulate." "Disappointed?" There was amusement in his voice now, but also something that might have been hurt. "No," Sarah said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "The opposite, actually." They stared at each other across the small table, and Sarah became acutely aware of how close they were sitting, how the kitchen suddenly felt smaller and warmer. She had never been alone with a man like Jake Morrison, someone so completely at ease in his own skin, so grounded in his place in the world. Her dating experience in Austin consisted mainly of graduate students and young professionals who spent more time talking about their ambitions than actually pursuing them. "Tell me about your typical day," she said, trying to regain her professional composure. Jake smiled, as if he knew exactly what she was doing. "Up at 4:30. Check the cattle, make sure none are sick or injured. Repair whatever broke overnight, and something always breaks. Move the herds if the grass is getting thin in one pasture. Fix fence, check water sources, treat any animals that need attention. If we're lucky, we quit around sundown. Every day? Every day. Cattle don't take weekends off, and neither do we. Sarah scribbled notes, but found herself watching Jake's hands as he talked, noting the calluses and small scars that spoke of years of hard work. She had never noticed men's hands before, but something about Jake's made her stomach flutter in a way that was entirely unprofessional. What about help? Do you have ranch hands? 3 full-time guys. Good men, been with us for years. But, when my father died 2 years ago, I inherited more than just the land. I inherited his debts, his responsibilities, and his reputation. Jake's expression grew serious. This ranch feeds a lot of families, not just mine. That's not something I take lightly. The weight of responsibility in his voice struck Sarah unexpectedly. In her world, people complained about their jobs, switched careers when they got bored, treated work as something to endure until the weekend. But Jake spoke about his obligations as if they were sacred trusts, binding him to this land and these people in ways she was only beginning to understand. Don't you ever want to leave? See something different? Jake was quiet for so long that Sarah wondered if she had overstepped. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. I went to college in Houston. Studied business, figured I'd come back and modernize the operation. Spent 4 years learning about profit margins and efficiency models. He smiled ruefully. Took me about a week back here to realize that some things can't be improved, only honored. What do you mean? This land has been good to my family for almost a century. The cattle know these pastures, the horses know these trails. The families who work here have been here longer than I've been alive. You don't modernize that, you protect it. Sarah found herself leaning forward, caught up in his passion. But surely there are aspects of running a ranch that could be improved with modern methods? Of course. We use modern veterinary techniques, better breeding practices, more efficient equipment when it makes sense. But the heart of what we do, caring for the land and the animals, that hasn't changed much in 100 years, and it shouldn't. As the evening wore on, Sarah realized she had filled more pages in her notebook than she had in any previous interview, but more than that, she had found herself genuinely interested in every word Jake said. His stories about difficult calving seasons, drought years when they had to drive cattle to water sources 20 miles away, and the delicate balance of managing grasslands painted a picture of a life far more complex and demanding than she had imagined. I should let you get some rest, she said finally, glancing at her watch and realizing they had been talking for 3 hours. What time do you start in the morning? 4:30, Jake said, then hesitated. You're welcome to come along if you want to see what ranch work really looks like. Fair warning though, it starts early and gets dirty fast. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. The sensible thing would be to decline, to stick to the safe interview format and return to Austin with her notes. But something about Jake Morrison and his quiet confidence made her want to step outside her comfort zone. I'll be here, she said, standing up and gathering her things. Thank you for the coffee and the conversation. Jake walked her to the door, and as she stepped onto the porch, he called her name softly. When she turned back, he was silhouetted in the doorway, the warm light from the kitchen behind him. Sarah? Bring different shoes. She laughed, surprising herself with the sound. I will. Driving back to her motel in town, Sarah found herself replaying every moment of the evening. She had come to the Double Creek Ranch expecting to write a straightforward profile of a working cowboy for the magazine's Texas Heritage series. Instead, she had discovered a man whose depth and complexity challenged every assumption she had brought with her. More troubling was the way her heart had raced every time Jake looked directly at her, the way she had found herself studying his mouth when he smiled, the way she had felt genuinely disappointed when the evening ended. Sarah had always prided herself on her professionalism, but something about Jake Morrison made her feel like a different person entirely, someone braver and more alive than the careful, controlled woman she had always been. Back in her small motel room, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her notebook full of quotes and observations. She had enough material for her article already, but she knew she would be back at the ranch in the morning, and it had nothing to do with journalism. For the first time in her 24 years, Sarah Martinez was falling for someone completely outside her world, and the realization terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. Tomorrow she would see Jake Morrison in his natural element, watching him work with animals and land that had shaped 4 generations of his family. She had no idea what she was walking into, but, for once in her carefully planned life, she didn't care. The thought kept her awake long into the night, her heart racing with possibilities she had never dared to imagine. Sarah's alarm buzzed at 4 in the morning, jarring her from restless dreams filled with blue eyes and gentle drawls. She had managed maybe 3 hours of sleep, but adrenaline carried her through the shower and into the clothes she had hastily purchased at the town's only general store the night before: sturdy jeans, work boots, and a cotton shirt that felt foreign against her city-soft skin. The drive to the Double Creek Ranch in the pre-dawn darkness felt like entering another world entirely. No streetlights, no traffic, just her headlights cutting through the Texas morning and the distant sound of cattle beginning to stir. By the time she parked near the main house, the eastern horizon showed the faintest hint of pink, and she could see a light on in what she assumed was the kitchen. Jake emerged from the barn leading a saddled horse, and Sarah's breath caught at the sight of him. Yesterday she had seen him in his kitchen, relaxed and conversational. This morning he moved with the purposeful efficiency of a man completely in his element, every gesture economical and sure. He wore faded jeans and a work shirt, his hair still damp from washing, and, when he saw her approaching, his face lit up with surprise and what might have been pleasure. "Didn't really think you'd show," he admitted, securing the horse's reins to the fence post. "Most people change their minds about ranch work once they think about the hours." "I said I'd be here," Sarah replied, pleased that her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "What do we do first?" Jake studied her new clothes with approval. "Better. We start by checking on a cow that was acting strange yesterday. She might be having trouble calving." He paused, assessing her reaction. "It can get messy." "You sure you're up for it?" Something in his tone suggested he expected her to back down, to reveal herself as just another city girl playing at being tough. The challenge sparked something stubborn in Sarah's nature that she hadn't known existed. "I'm here to see your real life, remember? All of it." Jake's smile was slow and genuine. "All right then. Let's go." He helped her up onto a gentle mare named Butterscotch, his hand steady and warm as he adjusted her stirrups. Sarah had ridden a few times at summer camps as a child, but nothing had prepared her for the feeling of sitting on horseback in the growing dawn, watching Jake mount his own horse with the fluid grace of someone who had been doing it since before he could walk properly. They rode in comfortable silence for the first few minutes, the horses picking their way carefully across terrain that Jake navigated by instinct. Sarah found herself acutely aware of everything: the creak of leather, the warm smell of the horses, the way Jake sat in his saddle as if he and the animal were one creature, the gradual lightening of the sky that revealed the true scope of the Double Creek Ranch. "There," Jake said quietly, pointing toward a small grove of trees near a creek bed. "See her? Standing apart from the others." Sarah squinted and made out the shape of a cow standing motionless while the rest of the small herd grazed nearby. Even to her inexperienced eye, something looked wrong with the animal's posture. "What's the matter with her? She's been in labor too long. Calf might be positioned wrong, or too big for her to deliver naturally." Jake's voice grew serious. "If we can't help her soon, we'll lose them both." They dismounted near the creek, and Jake pulled a veterinary kit from his saddlebags. Sarah watched as he approached the cow with slow, careful movements, speaking to her in the same gentle tone he had used with Sarah the night before. The animal was clearly in distress, her breathing labored and her eyes wide with pain and exhaustion. "Easy, Mama," Jake murmured, running his hands along the cow's flanks. "Let's see what we can do for you." What followed challenged every assumption Sarah had ever made about ranch work being simple or romantic. Jake worked with focused intensity, his movements precise and purposeful as he examined the cow and determined that the calf was indeed positioned incorrectly for normal delivery. Sarah found herself assigned the role of assistant, holding equipment and following Jake's quiet instructions as he worked to save both mother and baby. "Can you handle this?" Jake asked at one point, glancing at Sarah's pale face. It's not pretty. Sarah swallowed hard and nodded. What do you need me to do? For the next hour, Sarah witnessed Jake Morrison transform into something she hadn't expected, a healer whose gentle competence was matched by an unwavering determination to save lives that most people would consider expendable. His hands, which she had noticed for their calluses and scars, worked with surprising delicacy as he maneuvered the calf into position for delivery. There, Jake said suddenly, satisfaction clear in his voice. Got him turned. Come on, Mama, push. The birth was messy, exhausting, and absolutely miraculous. Sarah found herself crying as the calf emerged, tiny and perfect, its mother immediately beginning to clean and care for her baby despite her own exhaustion. Jake sat back on his heels, covered in mud and, worse, grinning with the joy of success. Always gets to me, he admitted, wiping his hands on a towel from his kit. Doesn't matter how many times I've done it. Sarah stared at him, this man who had just spent an hour fighting for the lives of animals that represented nothing more than profit margins to most people. Her chest felt tight with emotions she couldn't name, and, when Jake looked at her with concern, she realized she was still crying. Hey, he said gently, moving closer. You okay? I know it's a lot if you've never seen anything like that before. It's not that, Sarah managed, though she couldn't quite explain what it was. Something about witnessing Jake's complete commitment to caring for vulnerable creatures had shifted something fundamental in her understanding of what strength really meant. Jake reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb, the gesture so tender that Sarah felt her breath catch. For a moment they stood frozen, acutely aware of each other and the intimacy of the moment. Then, Jake seemed to catch himself and stepped back, clearing his throat. We should check on the other cattle, he said, but his voice was rougher than it had been earlier. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of activity that gave Sarah new respect for the complexity of ranch management. They checked water sources, inspected fencing, moved a small herd to fresh pasture, and treated a horse with a minor injury. Through it all, Jake maintained a running commentary about the decisions he was making and, why, treating Sarah as if her questions were intelligent rather than ignorant. You're a natural, he said as they paused for lunch under a shade tree, watching Sarah handle a gentle gelding with growing confidence. Most city folks are afraid to touch the animals. I've never done anything like this before, Sarah admitted, accepting the sandwich Jake offered from his saddlebags. I mean, I've never really done anything before. Not anything real. Jake studied her face. What do you mean, nothing real? Sarah struggled to put her feelings into words. My whole life has been safe. Predictable. School, internships, job, apartment. I wake up, I go to work in an air-conditioned office, I write stories about other people's lives, I go home and watch television. I've never delivered a calf or fixed a fence or spent a day working with my hands. Nothing wrong with office work, Jake said carefully. The world needs writers and journalists. But, what have I actually contributed? What have I built or saved or protected? Sarah's voice grew passionate. This morning I watched you save 2 lives before breakfast. You're responsible for thousands of acres of land, hundreds of animals, the livelihoods of families who depend on this ranch. What have I ever done that mattered? Jake was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those thoughtful blue eyes. You're here, he said finally. You showed up this morning even though you were scared. You stayed when things got messy. You asked good questions and helped when I needed it. That matters. Something in his tone made Sarah look up sharply, and she found Jake watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. The air between them seemed charged with possibility, and Sarah felt her heart begin to race again. Jake, she began, then stopped, not sure what she wanted to say. I know, he said quietly. I feel it too. The admission hung between them like a bridge that once crossed, could never be uncrossed. Sarah had never been the kind of person who acted on impulse, who took emotional risks, who allowed herself to be vulnerable. But, something about Jake Morrison and this place was calling out parts of herself she hadn't known existed. I don't know what I'm doing, she whispered. Jake's smile was gentle and understanding. Neither do I. They finished lunch in a silence that felt full of unspoken possibilities. As they prepared to return to the ranch house, Jake helped Sarah mount her horse again, his hands lingering on her waist longer than strictly necessary. The contact sent electricity through her entire body, and, when she looked down into his upturned face, she saw her own confusion and desire reflected in his eyes. The afternoon brought new challenges that demanded Jake's attention: a section of fence damaged by fallen tree, a water pump that had stopped working, a delivery of feed that needed to be checked and stored. Sarah found herself genuinely useful, holding tools and learning the 100 small tasks that kept a ranch functioning. More than that, she found herself studying Jake with new eyes, seeing how his leadership style combined quiet authority with genuine care for everyone and everything under his protection. "The men respect you," she observed as they watched Jake's crew efficiently repair the damaged fencing. "I hope so," Jake replied. "My father taught me that respect has to be earned every day. These men know more about ranch work than I'll ever learn. My job is to listen to them and make decisions that keep us all working together." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that Sarah had never seen in the city, she realized that her assignment was supposed to be finished. She had more than enough material for her article, and her editor expected her back in Austin the next day. But the thought of leaving Jake and the Double Creek Ranch felt like tearing something essential away from herself. "I should probably head back to town soon," she said reluctantly as they approached the main house. Jake dismounted and helped her down from her horse, his hands strong and sure on her waist. But, instead of stepping back immediately, he kept his hands on her waist and looked directly into her eyes. "Stay for dinner," he said quietly. "Please." Sarah felt herself nodding before her rational mind could object. "Okay." They stood there for a moment longer, Jake's hands warm on her waist, Sarah's heart hammering in her chest. She had never wanted to be kissed more in her entire life, and, from the way Jake was looking at her mouth, she thought he might be thinking the same thing. But, then, one of his ranch hands approached with a question, and the moment passed. Dinner was simple fare: grilled steaks, corn on the cob, fresh bread, but eating it at Jake's kitchen table felt more intimate than any restaurant meal Sarah had ever shared. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversation flowing as easily as it had the night before, but underneath it all was a current of awareness that made every casual touch, every shared glance, feel charged with meaning. "I should really go," Sarah said finally, though the words felt like stones in her throat. Jake walked her to her truck, and they stood in the gathering darkness, neither quite ready to say goodbye. The night sounds of the ranch surrounded them: cattle settling for the night, the distant call of an owl, the gentle whisper of wine through the grass. "Sarah," Jake said suddenly, his voice urgent. "I need to tell you something." She turned to face him fully, her heart racing. "What?" "Today was..." He struggled for words. "Today was the best day I've had since my father died. Having you here, seeing everything through your eyes, it reminded me that this life I've chosen is worth something. You made me remember why I love this place." Sarah felt tears pricking her eyes. "Jake, I know you have a life in Austin. I know this is just a story assignment for you. But I want you to know that meeting you has meant something to me. Something important." The sincerity in his voice, the vulnerability he was allowing her to see, broke down the last of Sarah's defenses. Before she could talk herself out of it, she reached up and cupped his face in her hands. "It's not just a story assignment," she whispered. "Not anymore." Jake's eyes searched her face in the moonlight. "What are you saying?" Sarah's heart pounded so hard she was sure he could hear it. She had never been the bold one, never taken emotional risks, never put herself out there to be rejected. But Jake Morrison had awakened something in her that refused to be silenced. "I'm saying that in 2 days, you've turned my whole world upside down," she said, her voice trembling with honesty. "I'm saying that I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. I'm saying that the thought of leaving tomorrow and never seeing you again makes me want to cry." Jake's hands came up to cover hers where they rested against his face. "Sarah." "I know it's crazy," she rushed on before she lost her courage. "I know we barely know each other. I know you probably think I'm just some silly city girl who doesn't understand what real life is like. But, Jake, you've shown me what I've been missing. You've shown me what it means to live a life that matters. You're not a silly city girl, Jake said firmly. You're brave and curious and stronger than you know. Today proved that. They stood there in the darkness, hands touching faces, hearts racing with possibility. Sarah had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable, so terrifyingly alive. So what do we do now? She whispered. Jake's smile was soft and full of promise. Now we see what happens next. 3 weeks later, Sarah sat in her Austin apartment staring at the article she had written about Jake Morrison and the Double Creek Ranch. The piece was good, perhaps the best writing of her career, but every word felt like a betrayal of the intimacy they had shared. How could she capture the complexity of a man like Jake in 1,200 words? How could she explain to readers what it felt like to watch him save lives, to see him command respect without demanding it, to witness the quiet strength that made him everything she hadn't known she needed? Her phone buzzed with a text from Jake. Article comes out tomorrow. Nervous about seeing myself in print. Sarah smiled despite her melancholy. They had texted daily since she left the ranch, long conversations that stretched late into the night, but it wasn't enough. She missed his presence, his quiet competence, the way he made her feel capable of more than she had ever imagined. Her editor had been thrilled with the article, calling it a perfect blend of journalism and human interest that would definitely be picked up by other publications. Sarah should have been celebrating a career breakthrough, but instead she felt empty, displaced, as if she had left the best part of herself on a ranch 3 hours away. The next morning brought phone calls from other magazines wanting similar pieces, interview requests, and congratulations from colleagues who saw her sudden success as validation of her talent. Sarah went through the motions of professional gratitude while her heart remained firmly planted in Double Creek. It was Jake who called her that evening, his voice warm with pride and something else she couldn't quite identify. Read the article, he said without preamble. Sarah, it's beautiful. You made this place sound like something special. It is something special, she replied. You're something special. There was silence on the line, the kind of loaded pause that carried more weight than words. Finally, Jake spoke. I miss you. The simple honesty of it broke something open in Sarah's chest. I miss you too. More than I thought possible. Then, come back. Jake. I'm serious. Come back. Not for another story, not for another interview. Come back because this thing between us deserves more than phone calls and text messages. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the familiar tug of war between safety and possibility. My job is here. My life is here. Is it? Really? Jake's voice was gentle but persistent. Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you've been sleepwalking through that life for years. When you were here, you were awake. Really awake. Don't you want to feel that again? The truth of his words hit her like a physical blow. She had been sleepwalking, going through the motions of a life that looked successful from the outside but felt hollow at its core. 3 days on Jake's ranch had shown her what it meant to live with purpose, to wake up each morning with work that mattered, to go to bed each night exhausted but fulfilled. I'm scared, she admitted. Of what? Of everything. Of leaving my job, of disappointing my parents, of moving to a place where I don't know anyone except you. Of taking a risk this big for someone I've known for less than a week. You've known me for 3 weeks, Jake said with gentle humor. But, I understand being scared. This is scary. What we're talking about is crazy and impractical and probably stupid. Then, why are we talking about it? Because sometimes the crazy, impractical, probably stupid thing is also the right thing. Because what I feel for you doesn't happen every day, and I'm not ready to let it go without a fight. Sarah felt tears running down her cheeks. No one had ever fought for her before, had ever seen her as worth taking risks for. The men she had dated in Austin had been safe choices, relationships of convenience rather than passion. I don't know how to be brave, she whispered. Yes, you do, Jake said firmly. You showed up at 4 a.m. You stayed when the calf was born. You asked hard questions and challenged yourself and didn't run away when things got difficult. That's brave, Sarah. That's the bravest thing there is. That night, Sarah lay awake thinking about courage and safety, about the difference between existing and living. She thought about Jake's hands, gentle with frightened animals and confident with difficult decisions. She thought about the way he looked at her as if she were capable of anything. She thought about the person she became when she was with him, braver, more alive, more herself than she had ever been. The next morning, she called her editor and requested a meeting. "I want to do a follow-up series," Sarah said, her heart pounding with the magnitude of what she was proposing. "The response to the Morrison piece has been incredible. I want to do an in-depth look at modern ranch life, the challenges and changes facing family operations like Double Creek. It would require extended time in the field, maybe 3 months of research." Her editor's eyes lit up with interest. "That could be excellent. How extended are we talking?" "I'd need to base myself closer to the ranch. Maybe rent a place in the area, really embed myself in that world to tell the story properly." It wasn't a complete lie, Sarah told herself. She did want to write about ranch life, about the challenges facing families like Jake's. But, more than that, she wanted a legitimate reason to go back, a professional justification for the leap her heart was demanding. 2 days later, Sarah loaded her car with everything that mattered and drove west toward Double Creek. She had given up her apartment, arranged for her furniture to go into storage, and taken a leave of absence that might or might not turn into resignation, depending on how the next few months unfolded. Her parents had expressed concern about her sudden career change, but something in her voice when she talked about Jake had silenced their objections. The drive to the ranch felt like driving toward her future, exciting and terrifying in equal measure. She had called Jake to let him know she was coming, but she hadn't explained the full scope of what she was doing. That conversation would have to happen in person. Jake was waiting for her when she pulled up to the main house, and the sight of him standing in the fading afternoon light made her heart skip several beats. 3 weeks apart had not dimmed the effect he had on her. If anything, seeing him again after missing him so intensely made her realize just how deeply she had fallen. He approached her car with a smile that was equal parts joy and uncertainty. "You came back." "I came back," she confirmed, stepping out of the car and into his arms without hesitation. The hug lasted longer than friendship required, and, when they finally separated, both of them were smiling with something that looked suspiciously like relief. "How long can you stay this time?" Jake asked, his hands still resting on her shoulders. "That depends," Sarah said, her courage wavering slightly under the intensity of his gaze. "On whether you meant what you said about taking risks for the right person." Jake's expression grew serious. "I meant every word. Because I gave up my apartment. I took a leave of absence from my job. I drove here with everything I own because I can't stop thinking about you and this place and the person I am when I'm here." The words came out in a rush, nervous energy making her talk faster than normal. "I know it's crazy. I know we barely know each other. I know there are a million reasons this could be a terrible mistake, but, Jake, I've never felt this way about anyone, and I can't go back to pretending that my old life was enough." Jake stared at her for a moment, his face cycling through surprise, disbelief, and something that might have been wonder. Then, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. "You beautiful, brave, crazy woman," he murmured against her lips. "Do you have any idea what you're doing to me?" "Tell me," Sarah whispered, her hands fisting in the fabric of his shirt. "You're making me believe in things I thought I was too practical to want. You're making me hope for a future I hadn't dared to imagine." His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones as he studied her face. "You're making me fall in love with you so hard and fast that it should probably scare me, but it doesn't. It just makes me grateful." Sarah's breath caught. "Jake. I love you," he said simply. "I know it's too soon and too crazy and completely impractical, but I love the way you ask questions and challenge yourself and see beauty in things other people take for granted. I love your courage and your curiosity and the way you make me want to be worthy of the way you look at me." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks as she realized that all her fears about taking this risk had been eclipsed by a much larger truth. She was completely, irrevocably in love with Jake Morrison, and nothing else mattered as much as that. "I love you too," she said, her voice thick with emotion. I love your gentleness with the animals and your strength when things get difficult and the way you make me feel like I can be more than I ever thought possible. I love this place and what you've built here and the way you make me understand what it means to have a home." Jake's smile was radiant as he pulled her closer. "So what happens now?" Sarah looked around at the ranch that was already starting to feel like home, at the man who had shown her what it meant to live with purpose and passion, at the future that stretched ahead of them full of challenges and possibilities she couldn't wait to explore. "Now we see what we can build together," she said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him again. 3 months later, Sarah's series of articles about modern ranch life had been picked up by a national magazine and turned into a book deal. She had rented a small house in town and was splitting her time between writing and learning the intricacies of ranch management from Jake. It wasn't easy, the learning curve was steep, the work was physically demanding, and there were days when she questioned her sanity for giving up her comfortable city life. But there were more days when she woke up next to Jake and felt grateful for every risk she had taken to get there. There were evenings when they worked side by side in comfortable silence, and mornings when they rode out to check the cattle as the sun painted the sky in impossible colors. There were quiet moments when Jake would look at her with wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real, and passionate kisses that left them both breathless with possibility. "No regrets?" Jake asked one evening as they sat on the porch steps, watching the sunset and planning their next day's work. Sarah considered the question seriously. Her old life in Austin seemed like something that had happened to someone else, safe, predictable, ultimately empty. This life was harder in every measurable way, but it was also richer, more meaningful, more authentically hers. "None," she said firmly, lacing her fingers through his. "Well, maybe one." Jake raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" Sarah turned to face him fully, her heart fluttering with the magnitude of what she was about to say. "I regret that it took me 24 years to find you. I regret all the time we could have had together if I'd been brave enough sooner." Jake's smile was tender as he brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "We have all the time in the world now. Promise?" "I promise," Jake said solemnly. "You're my finale, Sarah Martinez. The last woman I'll ever love, the last risk I'll ever need to take. Everything that came before was just preparation for loving you." Sarah felt her cheeks flush with the same combination of joy and embarrassment that had marked their first meeting. But now she understood that the flush wasn't from nervousness, it was from recognition, from her heart understanding what her mind hadn't yet accepted. "You're my virgin heart," she whispered, echoing words she had said to him weeks earlier in a moment of complete vulnerability. "The first real love I've ever known, the first time I've ever felt completely myself with another person." They kissed as the sun disappeared behind the horizon, and Sarah thought about the magazine article that had brought them together, about the courage it had taken to step outside her safe life, about the man who had shown her what it meant to live with purpose and passion. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons in ranch management, new chapters in the book she was writing about this life they were building together. But tonight was perfect, complete in its simple intimacy, two people who had taken enormous risks for love and found themselves exactly where they belonged. As Jake helped her to her feet and they walked hand in hand toward the house they would soon officially share, Sarah realized that her story had never really been about profiling a cowboy for a magazine. It had been about finding her way home to a life and a love that transformed everything she thought she knew about herself. And it was only just beginning.